While we wait to see if special counsel Robert Mueller will testify before Congress, the president continues to attack the investigation, calling it a coup. He also maligned the FBI, saying that it has no leadership.
Meanwhile, Attorney General William Barr has appointed a U.S. attorney to examine the Trump-Russia investigation's origins to determine if intelligence efforts were, quote, lawful and appropriate. According to senior national security correspondent of the Intercept, Jim Risen, the president now has a, quote, willing lackey in the attorney general who is aiding and abetting the president's efforts to control the DOJ. Here to expand on this and discuss the latest in the Russia investigation is Jim Risen. He also serves as director of the Press Freedom Defense Fund, which supports news organizations, journalists, and whistleblowers in legal fights. Great to have you back, sir.
Thanks for having me.
All right, explain your view here laid out in your recent article. Did Donald Trump's grip on the Justice Department sabotage Robert Mueller's investigation? Is it your view that Mueller was able to discover everything there was to discover, or was Trump's efforts to obstruct the investigation basically, were they successful?
Well, I came at this from reading a close reading of the Mueller report. And if you read the report and then you look at the history of special prosecutors, you see the final result of the Mueller report is a very hesitant, tentative investigation of the facts. Mm-hmm. There's many points throughout in which Mueller backs away from the logic of his own investigation. And there are points at which he doesn't pursue obvious questions, both in terms of contacts between the Russians and the Trump organization, and in terms of obstruction of justice. And so I come away thinking, okay, why was he so tentative? Mm-hmm. Why was he not willing to pursue obvious questions? And I think, and why did he take such a narrow framing of what his mandate was? If you read the portions of the first volume of the report where it discusses contacts between Russians and the Trump organization and the Trump campaign, he basically dismisses any contact between the Russians and Trump, people in the Trump circle, if he cannot specifically pin it to the GRU's hacking of the DNC computer systems. Mm-hmm. And so there are all these unexplained contacts documented in the Mueller report, which he doesn't go to any length at all to try to explain. He just says, I couldn't get to the bottom of that. And so I come away thinking, okay, why was he so tentative? I think part of it is Mueller himself. That's his personality.
Right, it's his style.
And one of the things I talk about was his time as FBI director. He took a very narrow view of things like the torture, the abuse of detainees at Guantanamo. When he found out about it, he pulled FBI agents out of those interrogations that were abusive, but he didn't report it, didn't start an investigation of the CIA or the military. He didn't do anything in terms of, starting a criminal investigation. And he found out about this years before the Abu Ghraib scandal.
Wow.
So I think that part of it is he's a very narrow, linear person to begin with. But I think the other part of that is that there had to be there was a constant pressure on him and on the Justice Department from day one. You fire Comey, then you begin to pressure Sessions to unrecuse, then you begin to pressure Rod Rosenstein. And so there was just constant pressure from Trump, publicly and privately, throughout the entire period. And I think that Mueller had to incorporate some of that into his thinking. And I think at the very least, it made him realize he couldn't take forever to do this investigation. He had to wrap it up. And I think one of the things, if you look at, for instance, the Iran-Contra investigation, Lawrence Walsh took far longer with his investigation. He pursued indictments and investigations much longer than Mueller has. Ken Starr pursued areas that were far flung from, people forget he was supposed to investigate Whitewater.
Right. Right.
He wasn't supposed to investigate Monica Lewinsky. So I think it's a very different special prosecutor, very different circumstances where the president has been publicly pressuring him from day one.
But Jim, how do you reconcile this with the Mueller report section where he says that not a single subpoena was denied, everything he asked for was given to him? I mean, by all accounts, Rod Rosenstein, Jeff Sessions wasn't even involved in all of this. And he was allowed to do whatever he wanted. I mean, he was pursuing areas of inquiry which nobody in the government would want. I mean, and let's be honest, it's not a flattering document for the administration.
No, I think, but yeah. I think and I agree with you. I think he did a fairly thorough investigation, but I think but he also backed away from obvious questions that are left unanswered. And I think ultimately his decision not to prosecute Trump on obstruction of justice was really an abrogation of his responsibility, where he had an opportunity to challenge the Justice Department's longstanding Office of Legal Counsel opinion saying that you can't indict a sitting president, and he chose not to do that. I think I can't prove that Trump's pressure was the reason that there's a direct causal relationship between all these things, but I think it's fairly obvious that a climate was created by Trump that put Mueller in a box and made the clock running in his head, where I've got to finish this.
What is your view of how Attorney General Barr has characterized the report and handled the release of the report?
I think it's just unbelievable. I mean, here's a guy who was in people thought of him as a very different character coming in because he was from the Bush
He was from
circle.
the old school. Maybe the old school wasn't so different after all.
Exactly. and so he now is doing things that Sessions wouldn't even do. And that's the scary part. He's now, this new investigation of the origins of the Russia investigation, on top of the Justice Department Inspector General's own investigation of the origins of the Russian investigation, is just bizarre. When you're starting a new investigation at the same time the IG is doing an investigation, and it's obvious that he's trying to please Donald Trump.
But are you not interested in the origins of the investigation?
There already is an investigation of that. The Justice Department's Inspector General has been conducting
right, but he's reviewing the conduct. This goes to more of the dossier. Given your own background, are you not fascinated? How opposition research and all of this interplay between the highest levels of the United States government made its way into the surveillance of an American citizen?
Well,
it's fascinating.
At the very least. I think that if you want to investigate it, fine. But I'm just saying it's clear that the Justice Department has been highly politicized by Trump, and that they are responding at every point to whatever Trump tweets or whatever Trump wants to, tells them over lunch someplace. I just think it's ridiculous that you now have Trump able to direct investigations. There's supposed to be some kind of independence at the Justice Department. Clearly, there is no independence anymore.
Can you play this out for me a little bit? So we've got the pending IG report. Whenever that happens, we now have this new investigators investigation.
Right.
What role will Barr have again in characterizing the results of those investigations to the American people?
That was the other thing that he did with the Mueller report. That's an excellent question. They're creating some investigation now that its mandate and purpose is unclear. When you have an ongoing IG investigation, you have congressional oversight, and then you start a new investigation, it's not clear, is this a criminal investigation? Are you bringing in the FBI to conduct interviews as part of a criminal investigation?
So
what is the point of this?
Can I actually play devil's advocate there? Because another explanation is that Barr actually wants to avoid, some are pressuring him to appoint another special counsel to do this investigation, which would then have subpoena powers, which would, of course, have all the powers that Robert Mueller and his team had at their disposal. So in a way, this is a more limited version of that investigation. I mean, could that be what's going on here?
Possibly, but I mean, that's like saying, okay, well, we're not going to be quite as radical and stupid as Donald Trump.
Right.
But we'll be just enough. We'll do just enough to satisfy
to
him.
appease him.
I am curious, Gina, how do you reconcile this with the most prominent member of the Intercept is Glenn Greenwald, who has railed against this investigation, accepted the conclusions of the Mueller report. How do you reconcile this view with that? I mean, he would come at this with the opposite.
I disagree with him very strongly on all of this. I mean, we had a online debate. We've been very public about our disagreement.
I haven't seen that online debate. I'm going to go back and look that up.
It was actually not on. It was on video. So on the Intercept website. So he and I have we disagree completely on this.
One last thing I wanted to ask you about is there seems to be some movement, certainly, obviously, from Rudy Giuliani and others. Peter Schweizer is now out with, a piece that's raising questions about Biden and China and calling directly for an investigation into those activities. I mean, based on what we know about
Ukraine, you mean?
Ukraine, and Schweizer is also looking at China.
Yeah.
So. Based on what we know about Barr, do you think he's going to be amenable to these sort of politically motivated type investigations?
Well, that's what frightens me, frankly, is how easily how he seems to be swayed by whatever Trump and the right wing want to do. And I wrote the thing that bothers me. I wrote the original story in 2015 on Hunter Biden and the Ukraine when I was at the New York Times.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that.
And the story that is now being presented by the right wing is a perversion and a twisting of what I wrote.
So what did you write? What were the facts that you uncovered? And by the way, we should disclose The Hill's John Solomon has been one of the people who's been writing on Hunter Biden and Ukraine.
Right. What I wrote was that Hunter Biden was involved with Burisma, this energy company, and that it was, that there was this ongoing British investigation of Burisma and money laundering, and that this was all going on at the same time that Joe Biden, as vice president, was going to Kiev to pressure them, the Ukrainian government, to get tougher on corruption, and that he was pushing for the ouster of this prosecutor who was refusing to cooperate with the British corruption investigations in the Ukraine. And the point I made in the story was that, Hunter Biden's involvement in this made it awkward for Biden, the vice president, to be pushing for this anti-corruption drive. What has been taken from that is that Biden's pressure on this prosecutor was somehow designed to protect his son, which is the opposite. He was doing it despite the fact that a stronger prosecutor in the Ukraine might lead to a more aggressive investigation.
But how can we know the vice president's intent in that?
I don't know his intent, but I know the facts, which are that that prosecutor was not going after Hunter Biden or Burisma. He was, in fact, blocking investigations into corruption in the Ukraine. And so that story has now been twisted to say he went to help oust this prosecutor who was going after his son. That is not true.
So in fact, based on your reporting, there was a risk that a new, more aggressive prosecutor may actually reopen that investigation, which had been closed, correct?
Right. I mean, it wasn't clear that would happen, but the guy he was going after, it was part of a broad Western campaign by the United States and other countries to deal with corruption in the Ukraine. It wasn't that they were trying to get rid of a prosecutor who was blocking corruption investigations.
Interesting. Jim Risen, thank you. Great to have you. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
So, next on Rising, over 100,000 miners are at the risk of losing their pensions.
United Mine Workers of America President Cecil Roberts is going to tell us what lawmakers can and should do to prevent the plan from going into the red when Rising returns.